What's going on, people? Welcome back to another position preview. And this week, I got Darren from LS11 to look ahead to the game on Tuesday night against Leeds. As always, leave down your comments below and we'll try to respond back to you as soon as possible. And let us know your thoughts and score predictions on the game. Darren, I've got a smile on my face, but, based on the last result, I really shouldn't. but talking about Leeds, you guys drew with Brighton 0-0, which is a rare 0-0 anyways. I barely see any Leeds games, have any goals in them. Normally it's all lots of 3-2s, 3-3s, 2-2s. So that was a surprise for me. But talking about your start to the season so far, you're currently sitting 17th in the league. And that has been a surprise for me personally because of how you played last season. And I think others as well, neutrals, have been surprised by it. So what's been the main problem at Leeds so far this season for you guys to struggle so far?
Right. Well, first, thanks very much for having me on. The main problem, I think, I don't know, people talk about second season syndrome, don't they? And I think Leeds to a certain extent have fallen foul of that. But I think injuries to some really, really key players have shown that there's not a lot of strength and depth in the squad, certainly for the Premier League. Now, Bielsa always likes to have a very sort of like tight and slimmed down squad. And he's always been quite happy to sort of like dip into the academy for, blooding youngsters. But I think he's been having to force his position on some of that. And so injuries to some pretty key players, really, with Rafinha being out and Rodrigo being out for quite a lot of the season, Koch being out, Bamford's been gone, Phillips has been in and out, who's a major player. Then we've only just got Llorente back in the last few games. So he's having to sort of like mix and match around with a team that was, like you say, was impressive in their first season last year in the Premier League, but everybody was fit pretty much. And this season, I don't know if it was because of, the longer league or the Euros in the summer. I don't know what actually has been the problem, but there just seems to have been a lot of injuries that have absolutely nailed Leeds United this season. They just don't seem to have got going. They're just like, as soon as you sort of think they're getting going, something comes along and then just sort of like knocks them off again. So I think there's been a lot of frustration. It's the first time I've been hearing sort of like, certain fans sort of questioning whether or not Marcelo Bielsa should be in the job, which is a stupid thing to be questioning considering what he's done for Leeds United in the last sort of like 4 years. The guy's the Messiah. He's taken this team that was, struggling to get out of the Championship and made them into, this very, very good Premier League side and hasn't really spent vast amounts of money doing it. So, yeah, to nail it down, I think injuries have been a real big problem. And then, form is temporary, but it seems to have been, our form has been pretty bad for most of this season.
Are you worried about, of course, you're saying injuries have hurt you guys, but are you worried about teams adapting to Leeds style of play? For example, last season when he came up, it was pretty much new to the Premier League, how Leeds were playing with man-to-man marking. Are you worried about that by any chance? Personally, I'll be honest, I haven't watched every single Leeds game, so I cannot give that analysis, but that's why you're on here to let us know. So has that been a factor as well?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, I think. That high press, that fast pace that Leeds sort of, they used to come out of the traps so damn quickly. I think some teams have sort of got wind of that. And you would get games last year. No Leeds game last year was boring. They would lose maybe 4-0 on one match and then they'd be beating someone 4-3 the next one. So it was always very, very exciting. And it sort of gets used overused, sort of like a roller coaster ride. But on the whole, it was very, very attractive football to be watching, that high press. But I think there are a certain number of managers that have sort of cottoned on to that way that Leeds, and they know what Leeds are going to do. Whereas last season, it was a bit of a shock and a surprise to some people.
We talked about Bielsa just there for a few seconds, but talking about him in a bit more detail, let's say this form continues up until the New Year's time. Do you think there's a threat to his job, or do you think regardless of what happens, Bielsa will not get sacked?
No, I don't think Bielsa will get sacked. I mean, look, I think Bielsa will do what Bielsa wants, and I can't see him staying around for another. He signed on for a year. I think he's going to be. I reckon he may take another year contract, but I think that'll probably be it. I don't think we'll see any more than like this season, maybe one more season out of Bielsa. So I think Leeds fans have got to understand how special a time they've got right at the moment with Marcelo Bielsa. And there's a lot of pundits out there that absolutely slate Bielsa, saying who is he? Why does everybody revere him so much? He's never won anything in the game. There's certain amounts of truth to that. But you look at the jobs that he's had, and even you go back to like the probably the famous time that he had was at Newell's Old Boys, and they've named the bloody stadium after him there. So he's done something right in the game, and for him to be talked about by the likes of Guardiola and Pochettino as like someone that they've admired and looked up to in the way that he sort of trains and coaches people. And you just see what happened, realistically with the team that he took over in the Championship, as it were, that failed under Paul Heckingbottom, and he didn't bring. I think he brought one player in and turned them into just an absolute force to be reckoned with. It was an unbelievable turnaround, and I think he's brought a lot of pride back to the club. He's brought a lot of passion back to the club, and he brought them into the Premier League for the first time in 16 years. So, I think he's done all right. And yet, look, they could do with a few different players coming in. Maybe they could do with a bit of bolstering. And he's always, like I said before, wanted a nice slim squad to work with. And maybe that's a slight issue once you get a few injuries in there. That's certainly an issue that he's having to contend with at the moment. But I think he's fantastic. He's the Messiah.
Look, that's the one area which is very underrated. People talk about Bielsa, what he's doing right now with the current group of players, but when you look at the current group of players, as Palace fans, we know one of them, Patrick Bamford. When he was at Palace, the best thing that he was doing is just flicking his hair. He didn't even look like a footballer. And Bielsa's turned his Championship players into Premier League footballers, and I think you have to give him rating for that. And also, when you look at the level of depth that he does for every single game, remember the Derby, what happened with the Derby fiasco of, Bielsa looking at over the training ground and all that. But this man is in love with the game. I heard in the summer, he didn't take any time off. He was just working continuously as well. So when you're looking at better alternatives to Bielsa, go and show me them, because with these group of players here, another manager might even not get the best out of them like Bielsa's getting. So bring in a quality group of players. I think Leeds are flying high, and he's a very not underrated manager, but sometimes he gets disrespected more than he should because people just look at the base level rather than look at the whole thing. But that's Bielsa's chat there. You don't think he's going to go, and I don't think he should go as well, because
he won't. It's on his terms. He won't go at the end of this season. He may not stay on for another season afterwards. He might think, right now I've got one more year in me, hit this, and that'll be it. But he'll do what he wants to do. It's not the same sort of like contract that other managers have got. I don't think really. It's very it's definitely on his terms, no doubt. And if you're going to get rid of Bielsa, who are you going to get in? Realistically,
exactly. I don't.
Big Sam. Who wants?
Big Sam's going to be better than like. Come on now, come on.
I mean, come on.
Talking about managers, we brought in a new manager as well, Patrick Vieira, over in the summer.
Brought
in new players, Conor Gallagher, who's out on loan, Mark Guay, Olise. As a Leeds fan, what have you made of Palace so far this season? You faced us under Roy Hodgson last season. We've had some exciting games and some miserable games as a Palace fan watching it, especially at your ground when the reverse fixture happened. But what have you made of Palace so far?
Palace are an interesting one, aren't they? I remember last season. I mean, what was it? Patrick Bamford's armpit was offside, I think. That was an interesting one. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Whenever you've got a new manager, especially someone like Patrick Vieira, who had such an amazing playing career, I sort of think sometimes it's always very difficult for a manager like that to get maybe as much time as you would with a more maybe established name. So I think it seems to be doing an okay job for you guys. And I mean, it all depends on what the expectations are like the killer. I think with most football fans, I think, there's a lot of Leeds fans. Their expectation is after them finishing last season, sort of like mid-table, thinking, right, that's it, we're on for Europe. Like, come on, think about this. It's the first time back in the Premier League in 16 years. And I think that, there's a clump of clubs in sort of like the mid to bottom table that have just got, it's just staying in the Premier League. That's like winning the lottery every year, because the amount of money you're going to get rather than being in the Championship. And then after sort of, if you can establish yourself in sort of like 3 to 5 years in the Premier League, then start thinking, right, okay, maybe we should actually like start looking for European places on a regular basis. Because, there's so much money swilling around at the top of this league that, to think that you're going to do anything else is, delusions of grandeur, I think. But I think Palace have been okay, I think, really. I mean, Vieira, what are your thoughts on him? I always quite liked him as a player. So, he had that sort of real sort of like attitude. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts on him as a manager?
I love him. I love him due to the fact that he's brought a different style of play. As you mentioned, with Leeds fans and their expectations at Palace, we went past that 5-year mark. We continuously stayed up. So it reached a point where with Roy Hodgson, it was like, what are we trying to do? We face United, we have the same approach. We face Colchester United, we have the same approach. We face Derby, we have the same approach. We face you guys. It was literally the same thing week in, week out. But Patrick Vieira is that more modern manager. He plays attacking football. He likes to press and he likes to be on the front foot, which is what we haven't seen at Palace for a very long time. And we reached a point at a football club where if we're not going to try, then what is the point? So we've gambled with Patrick Vieira so far. It has worked, and there are rooms for improvement, of course. But I think Vieira so far has done a brilliant job with the amount of games that we played against the tough opponents as well. So I've been happy with him. But in terms of players, with you guys, I know you haven't had a great start to the season. What have you made of your players? Is there anyone to watch out for? Anyone that maybe we should be targeting?
Well, it depends who's fit. But, if Rafinha's back, then, a lot's been made of him. I think he's been the bargain of the century, personally. He's been a fantastic player. Rafinha's the one to watch out for. Dan James seems to be coming, scored, not the last game, the game before, got his first goal for the club. So he was sort of like a big signing from Man United. Was supposed to sign a year or so ago for Leeds, and it all sort of fell down at the 11th hour. But he's taken his time to sort of like he's been good, but he's just not been in the final third. It's just not been working out. But that seems to have been working. Also, Jack Harrison, who has been immense while he has been on loan for Leeds from Man City, signed him during the summer, but he hadn't started the season very well. He was just in a little bit of a lack of form, I think, but he's just starting to get back to his old self, I think, really. So those are definitely three to watch out. Obviously, Calvin Phillips, if he's fit, because he was subbed off, but feeling his calf, apparently. So who knows if it's a quick turnaround for him. That would be a massive loss. If there's no Calvin Phillips, Leeds don't play particularly well without Calvin Phillips, I think. He's a major part of what Leeds are all about and what Bielsa likes to do.
That's what I smile on my not for. Of course, as a Palace fan, if Calvin Phillips is not playing, hopefully it's not something serious. If Calvin Phillips is not playing, then our chances improve significantly. Everyone knows about Calvin Phillips. There's of course going to be some underdogs in your side that the neutrals might not know about. But Calvin Phillips, I guess, if you watch football, you know about what he can do. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But in terms of tactics, where is the main weakness that Palace could target? We talked about players and you listed a couple of players there. But in terms of tactically, what do you think Palace should do in order to go win this game? Of course, you're playing at home. We're away from home. What type of approach would you have if you're Patrick Vieira to go and beat Bielsa?
I think don't sit back. I think that the teams that seem to do well against Leeds are the ones that put Leeds on the front foot and absolutely have a pop at Leeds. I think those are the ones that seem to do quite well. Flooding the midfield seems to be quite keen. Really sort of stopping Leeds, because Leeds like to pass the ball around and quickly. That doesn't seem to have worked. God, if anybody watched the game against Brighton, they could hardly string like 2 passes together. So look, you're hitting Leeds. I mean, you could look at it in one or two ways. You come in at Leeds after a really disappointing performance against
Villa.
Brighton yesterday, which was really, really disappointing. But you could also then look at that first half against Spurs. Leeds were all over them and should have gone away. The 1-0 in the first half and should have scored another 2 or 3. And then Spurs seemed to just turn it around. So it's very sort of like, which Leeds United turns up. If an 85% fit Phillips is there, Rafinha, Rodrigo, and then we've got Harrison and James there as well. I think that'll make it quite difficult for Palace. But I think the key is like is stopping Leeds from the sort of like the quick pace passing that they like and disrupting their rhythm. The teams that seem to do that, then that starts to sort of like, the longer it stays 0-0, the longer that Leeds a worry. And then, you're going to have 35,000 at Ellen Road. That pressure, starts to sort of suddenly get bigger and bigger and bigger. I reckon that's what I would suggest. But don't tell them I told you that.
Well, trust me, Vieira's going to be looking at it, and even if he doesn't, with Palace, that's how we like to approach games. So it should suit us if you guys are going to be playing like that. Of course, I'll be traveling up there as well on a Tuesday night, and hopefully the weather is good, because we've seen games postponed in the Burnley and Tottenham one, so hopefully I won't be traveling for like 5 hours for no reason. But in terms of your score predictions and your lineup predictions, where do you stand? Let's start with the score prediction. How confident are you in this game? You're at home facing Palace, I'll let you know, we're coming off our worst performance so far this season. We've only lost 3 games, Chelsea, Liverpool and Villa. But the Villa game was worse than the Chelsea game, in my opinion, considering who we were facing. And, that probably our worst performance is the first game of the season, because that's when we faced Chelsea. So where do you stand? Do you think you guys can go get the 3 points at home?
Look, I think you've always got to back your team, haven't you, really? As Palace fans would probably back their team. So I think I'm never really great at score predictions. On the LS11 podcast, I'll just come up with some ridiculous score lines just because I never get them right anyway. So I'll go for 14-10 to Leeds. I'd imagine. I can't imagine it's going to be another 0-0 like it was against Brighton. So I'll go for 14-10.
14-10 it is. It's a cricket game. I don't think my heart can cope with 14-10. I'm gonna go for. You know what? I was confident before the Villa game. I was just thinking the last 2 games hasn't been that good for Palace. Before you go, I need to ask this as well before the lineup prediction.
Yeah.
Are you good at set pieces?
They're not great at set pieces, I've got to be honest with you. They're not great at defending set pieces either.
Oh, okay. All right, then. That gives me a bit of hope, because the 9 or 10 goals we've conceded so far this season out of 14 or 15 have been from set pieces. So if you're decent at set pieces, then that's automatic 1 or 2 goals like that. But that gives me a bit more hope. So based on your answer there, as we're going away from home, let me be positive as well. You went for a cricket score 14-10, and that'll be, you haven't reached that levels yet, but Leeds love a goal, so I won't be surprised if both teams just attack. But I'm gonna go for a 3-2 Palace. I don't even think it's like 2-1. I think it's going to be exciting game, because you're going to be coming at us. We're going to be going at you on the counter. Both teams will be up for it. It's cold Tuesday night at Ellen Road, so I think it'll be an exciting game. I really do. I'm saying that watch it be 0-0. Because that's what normally happens when you predict high scoring lines.
Yeah, exactly.
And then finally, who do you see starting for Leeds?
I don't think, depending on injuries, but I would imagine it won't. But Bielsa doesn't change it around too much. I would imagine Meslier in goal. You look at Dallas, Llorente, Cooper. I'm not sure about Firpo. Could be striking for Firpo. Phillips, Forshaw, Rafinha if he's fit. James, Harrison, Rodrigo. I'd say that would be the starting 11. But watch out, because he's been going for a lot of people on the bench, and he started Joe Gelhardt, who is literally if he starts him again because of injuries, then it'll be well worth watching because
I've seen that
he's
one game of him when he came. What game was it? I think it was at home against West Ham where he made his sub appearance.
yeah,
Something
and he
like that.
started his first game, I think, in the game against Spurs, and my God, this kid is going to be like world class.
Yeah.
You know, people are talking about in the same sort of breath as like a young Wayne Rooney, and when you watch him, it's very similar. So yeah, he'll be on the bench, I'm sure. So, but yeah, I don't think it'll be too dissimilar to what he played against Brighton, but maybe dropping Firpo to the bench, bringing Stroik on, I would imagine.
All right. Thank you to Darren for joining us for our opposition preview. And thank you to you for watching this. As always, as I've mentioned, let me know your score predictions and thoughts on the game as well. And Darren, where can they find your channel?
Just do a little search for LS11 on Twitter and YouTube, and we're there somewhere around there.
So LS11, that's it. If you search it up, you can find Darren's channel where I'll be on there giving my perspective on the game ahead of it on Tuesday night as well. So make sure to check them out. Thanks to everyone for listening, and until next time, up the Palace.